Oh, welcome today to Mike and Penn. We're doing an interview with Travis Williams. And we know him already very well as the creator of the Tassinara font for Liaishin. Absolutely spectacular and beautiful. And today we're going to learn more about his own book, Uly Quits His Job. And Travis, we're really interested to know how Uly came into your life and where is Uly right now in the publishing process.
Okay, well, it actually starts with the idea. The background for the idea is a friend told me about uh, being dehydrated after having kind of been stranded, and and uh, and he told me about this in such a way that he mentioned that part of it, and then I started thinking about, well, how would you get to that point, and uh, I mean, you could just be working outside in the summer, right? And maybe you're too far. Maybe you're, I don't know, somewhere where it's difficult. You're out in the northern latitudes of Canada, and you can't just run down to the store to buy a bottle of water, right? Or something like that. So I got to thinking about that, and like, how would all of this add up, and what would happen? And so I think that that was the nugget of the story. So it wasn't about quitting a job or anything at first, and then I started trying to get to that point, and then what would happen after that point. And I've also noticed that that's true in a lot of stories. And I used to didn't watch a movie or read a book in this way, but now I do. I think to myself, the writer or the director or the producer of that book or movie, or they have a vision for something. They have 30 seconds of video in their head that they want to either describe in writing or put into the movie, and the rest of the movie is serving to get to that point, and then everything after that is just trying to wrap up everything. And I think that I've started noticing movies and books that have that vision in them, that have that thing, and it may not be the most important scene in the whole story, but it is a scene in the story. And I read your book uh, in that way, and I actually worked on Nicola's book. I worked on your book, and and worked on the cover. I also did my cover, and on the cover of my book, I'll show it. Uh, that's and it's no spoiler to say that Uly quits his job, right? You know that much. You know that much going in, and here he's stranded, and he's walking down the middle of the road towards a bridge. And so there's like an important moment, an important turn of events in the cover that's about to happen, and so you see that on the cover, and it's like some kind of storm clouds here, and he's walking down the road, and he looks forlorn, and so I think that's that's one of those things I wanted to get to. And the other is something about a water bottle, and there's a couple of beats in the story, and that's what you're doing. And I think you did that for Liaishin. I think I watched Star Wars or something, or any movie, and I'll think, that's the thing that they were hoping to get to, and it may not even be all that critical to the whole story, but it's like this beautiful picture, or a scene, and they actually wrote to that, and then they wrote beyond it, and just came up with a story that matched it. But so the book itself has taken about 5 years. And I started writing it, and left it, and then came back to it, And Colleen, our publisher with Serotonin Creative, asked me what I was up to. What have you been up to lately? This was actually before COVID. Right around the time COVID was starting, we didn't even know that it was going to be huge, or that it would usher in the changes that were introduced after COVID. But she said, "What have you been up to?" And I said, "Well, I've been writing, and I've been thinking about, doing some graphic design for people and that kind of thing." And so later that year in 2020, I went ahead and kind of made a push to finish a hefty first draft. What I thought was a hefty first draft. To you, it's just, I don't know, one chapter. But but it's I did this first draft and I kind of handed it off and said, "Okay, do we need to check some we need to check the grammar a little bit." And Colleen read it and said, "Yeah, that has a lot of potential." And I forget, she said something really, or it needs some, I know what she said. She said, "It needs some light developmental work." And I said, "Okay, well, what does that mean?" And she said, "Well, let's let Nicola read it." And so Nicola read it. And and you know how you read something and you think that's not going to work that way. It sounds good, but it's just not going to work. And that's exactly what you said to me. And you said, these characters, I'm meeting new characters that I love, like 2/3 of the way through the book, and I don't like that. You've got to introduce all these characters to me at the beginning. And I said, "How do I do that?" So Uly is a very narrow time frame. It just takes place over a few days, and so he quits his job, and then I had him quit his job really early in the book, and he and then everything else happened after that. And in order to introduce these characters within sort of a time frame of the book, and not be like 6 months ahead and kind of gradually tell you about them, and then this thing happens with Uly, I decided to keep it a narrow, like 1 week window of time in my book, and so I introduced each of these characters kind of in the timeline of the story, and and when I did that, it made it a lot better. So thank you. And that was the broadest aspect of your advice, and you had a lot of detailed advice that I took to heart, and most of it I actually implemented. and then I took the story, and in the logic of meeting those characters ahead of time, it opened up a gap, and so I had to add a whole day, and then kind of extend it at the end a little bit too. And so that extra day really added a lot. And there are whole days in Uly that are completely fictional. Like, they didn't ever happen to anybody that I know. But there are beats, there are like points, little scenes that are things that have happened to people, that I just sort of borrowed. Like, one of them is my dad. He always told this story about a guy that he met who had who misspoke all the time. He said all of his words were wrong. And so there's a scene in the story where that happens. And Uly's like, is this guy, he's misusing these words. So there's a number of those kinds of little beats. But so I finished the story. I rewrote it after you had added half again more to the story after you had read it and told me what I really needed to do, how to make it into a real book instead of a novel, a novella. You said this is how you make it a novel. And then I worked with a cover artist who did I designed the cover, and this is the image I wanted, but he drew this, and he did the hand drawn lettering. But those are all separate elements, and they were from the beginning. I told Gary Horseman that I wanted them all to be separate elements, and so because I knew that I would take it and kind of play with it, and so each of, like, Uly could be as tall as the book, right? Like I could scale him up bigger. I could go in there and do that right now, and I could make the title smaller or whatever. So all of those pieces are different. And that's my graphic design eye and my graphic design sensibility, thinking, okay, let's do this so that it's flexible. And so worked on the cover, worked on editing it. You introduced me to Claire Tucker, my editor, and she is South African, and I think that's awesome. I think that it's awesome that my little Southern fiction book, all set in Georgia, is actually very international. Uly Quits His Job is being published out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and my graphic designer for the cover is in Quebec, actually Montreal, and the editor is in South Africa, and it'll be available anywhere in the world, and that's cool, I think. And it's set in Georgia, the U.S. state of Georgia, and so it's. But Claire edited it and had all kinds of. I mean, she was so good, and because I had expanded it and added a day and changed some things, she found all kinds of little continuity errors. And I hope that she found all of them, and that the one or two that I found after that, I even found one just the other day that was a reference to the wrong thing. And I thought, how many times have I gone back and fixed that? But if you mention, for instance, it's not this way in the book, but if you mention, that they're wearing pants, that your character is wearing pants, and then the next thing you know, they're wearing shorts, and that's like through half the book, then you've got to go back and fix that wherever, and it's just people who are reading it fresh for the first time will see it and just be like, wait a minute, he was wearing pants. But I've written it and read it 100 times, and it's like it starts to run together. You forget what you've changed and what you haven't changed in the sequence of the book, especially if you move a chapter or something. But Claire was great about that, and she found so many things, and she knows every possible combination of that. She may have to look them up, but like all compound words to me just need a space, and you keep writing. I have no idea. I have no idea if backyard or baseball or any of the other words. Okay, baseball, I guess, is one word, but I never know, and I get them wrong. And if I try to do it one way or the other, it's I'm always wrong. So the editing was finished. It took weeks for me to go back. If you don't know this, an editor only makes recommendations, at least in our independent kind of hybrid publishing world. I don't know what they do with, if you had a team of a staff who are working for you and you're a writer, then maybe your editors are have some, you've given them some freedom to move on and make the edits. But Claire didn't make any of the edits. She recommended all of the edits. And so you have to go through as a writer and choose, well, am I actually going to make this edit, or am I going to keep it? I mean, or am I going to keep it or leave it, or keep it or change it? And so I did that. That took weeks, and I thought it would take like 3 days. It took maybe 2 weeks. It's crazy how that works. The timeline for publishing can drag out, and your cover may not be quite ready, or you thought it was, and then you realize that, like for the cover for the hardback for the hardcover for Uly, I decided that I wanted this front image to wrap around to the inside flap, the front inside flap, and that wasn't quite enough. So I was about an inch short, and I thought, oh no. And it took hours to fix that. And also, I had to go back to Gary Horseman's original illustration and pull it back in, and then kind of like rework the whole thing again, because it didn't match, and I had changed it in such a way that you couldn't just add on to it. At least I didn't know how to do that. So these little things take hours, or they take a whole day, because you've made one small thing, one small change. Pre-release is April 5th, and my soft open is May 3rd. My publication date is May 3rd. So it's very soon, 2022, if you're watching this after those dates. So that's just coming up in a week. The pre-sale dates are coming up in a week, and then the publication date is not. I'm not calling it the launch date, because I don't know if I can launch that day, but it's going to be there, and then we're going to launch. The recommendation from marketing people is that publication date is when you should really push to have people reading it and buying it and leaving reviews, that kind of thing. So I'm going to push for that. So that gives me about another month to prepare for that. 5 or 6 weeks. So that's where we are in that. Also, my audiobook is under production, and yeah. And I appreciate you. I called it your coaching. You coached me on how to coach my audiobook narrator, and he's an actor. He's not as experienced at audiobooks at this time. He's done a few, but he doesn't have like 100 under his belt. But he is an actor, and he's been on TV and movies. He's been in some things over the years, and then he has a theater company that he runs in Charleston, South Carolina, which the story of Uly Quits His Job does take you to South Carolina at one point, to Charleston. And what's cool about that is that I was looking for anybody who could do a decent Southern accent, and they didn't have to be Southern, but I wanted a Southern accent. And there were I interviewed, or auditioned rather, several people in the Find a Way Voices online environment, and I think as many as 7. Some of them did really good Southern accents, and some of the people who auditioned were people who've done hundreds of books. So many, that's all they've been doing for 20 years, and and I thought, these guys have auditioned for this book, and it's not a super long book. It's not 150,000 words or anything. So it was kind of within my budget to basically use a lot of different people. Now, if they were out of my budget, because you can see what they charge, if they were out of my budget, I didn't even audition them. So I had a good group of auditions, but this narrator, I'm so excited about it. He just, for one thing, Uly meets a lot of people.
Well, I want to know about some of those people.
Okay, and the narrator has to do all these voices, and it's men and women, are kids, there are people who are in their 80s and 90s, and then young men and women. And so he's doing all these voices, and he's an actor, and he can do them, and I'm excited about that. So
can you tell
I'll
us
let
about the route that really takes the journey?
Yes. Okay. Well, so Uly, I wanted Uly to be from one place and start out, originally from one place, but he's taken a job. So he took a job far away from there, and that kind of isolates him. And then the job, he's on a work trip, and so then he's even more isolated. I just kept isolating Uly. Like, how do I keep pushing him into somewhere that he's not going to be at all comfortable? And then he quits his job. So the little promo is, pro tip: don't quit your job when you're on when you're traveling and your boss is your ride. Because if you quit your job and your boss is the ride and you're traveling, what are you going to do? And so you're stuck, right? And he's far from home, and then he takes a detour even farther away, going to Charleston, South Carolina, outside of Georgia, coming back, and he has to get home. That route takes him through a number of towns, including my hometown, which I know, and I used I used it because I just wanted to move him right straight through Hawkinsville, and that was the obvious. I chose a city for him to start in that was the obvious route would take him through Hawkinsville. So at one point I had him in a different city, and I got to looking on the map apps, and I realized it didn't make sense for him to go to Hawkinsville if he lived in that other city. So I moved him back to the one that he's in, and for his job. And then I wanted him to go to Savannah and be kind of on the coast. I like Savannah, and I had some ideas for things to do in Savannah. And I like Charleston. I've been there a couple of times, but I didn't know it well. So if you know Charleston, you'll be like, where is this house in Charleston? Where's this place? And no, it doesn't exist. I don't think I don't even know if it could exist the way I describe it. And then he comes back, and then he goes through Dublin, which is kind of halfway between Savannah and Atlanta. I have some characters and some things happen in Dublin, and then he goes to Atlanta. So that's the route.
All right. So along the route that Uly takes, he interacts with some businesses along the way, and you wanted to highlight some of those.
Yes. One of the things that I did in Uly is I celebrate some things. So, for instance, I celebrate Georgia. I like Georgia. I've grown up here. I've lived here most of my life, except for the 2 years that I lived in Vancouver, BC, and went to seminary at Regent College with our publisher Colleen, and that's how we know each other. But I celebrate some things, and one of the things I celebrate is entrepreneurship and businesses being themselves, people running businesses and attempting to thrive or just exist in some cases. So what I did is, in fact, I like to think that Uly is a fictional version of a textbook on doing business. Like, how do you manage staff? How do you manage your personnel? It's not the way his boss did. Like, there's also some negatives, right? Like, there's some negative examples, and people who read the book and get to know his boss at the beginning of it may not realize that that I'm actually being ironic when I talk about the boss, even though I'm saying things that are kind of positive. It's irony, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that because it could be read straight, right? Like you could read it as if this was like just the way things are should be. But I think that there's a celebration here of entrepreneurship because at every step he's meeting businesses, and one of them is here in Hawkinsville. It's a real business called Harris Country Meats. It's a butcher store and grocery store, and they gave me permission to talk about it, and I used the actual name of that business. But there are other businesses here in my town that I set in other places in the story that I've uprooted them from Hawkinsville and put them in Charleston or Savannah or something. For instance, there's a tire shop, and it's kind of critical to the story. And I use a real tire shop here in Hawkinsville as my inspiration. I don't give it a name in the book, but he uses. I didn't want to make Greyhound bus lines. I didn't want to put them in a bad light, and so I came up with a different bus company, and because I don't have anything against Greyhound, right? Like I didn't want Greyhound to be portrayed badly, so I said, oh well, he's using this other name brand bus line, but Greyhound is the one that you find. No one else would. No one could name another bus line, especially in rural areas in the South. I don't know about other areas of the country, but Greyhound is the one, right? So he tries to go to Greyhound, and he realizes that the old Greyhound station has been turned into a restaurant. Well, that's a real thing in Savannah. The old Greyhound station was turned into a restaurant, and it's kind of a fancy restaurant. And he goes into the restaurant saying, "Oh, where's the Greyhound station?" And I don't actually mention the name of the restaurant, but anybody in the know would know. And they are like, it's this way. And he walks out the door and he goes the wrong way. And he goes down and he goes to a different bus company. And then he stays overnight at a bed and breakfast. And that the description of that bed and breakfast is actually a private home here in Hawkinsville. And
what connection do you have to that home?
Well, for a few months, I lived there in the apartment, and there's an apartment in that house that isn't actually an apartment anymore. It's all a private house, but back then it was. When I lived there, right after I graduated with my degree in graphic design, I lived there just for a little while. But in the book, I described that apartment as Lucy's apartment because she has a bed and breakfast. So she has her own little apartment in the bed and breakfast. And in real life, it was never a bed and breakfast. That house isn't. And it's also not in Charleston. So but it could be. It could just as easily be. And in fact, there are Queen Anne Victorian homes in Charleston, but not this one. And I was looking it up. I did never get to go into the main house years ago when I lived there. And so I had actually already finished writing Uly. And just a few last fall, I had the opportunity to visit the owner of this house and get a tour. And it's fabulous. It's a magnificent house. And I completely changed the description in my book into a fictional variation of the real house because I had just made up stuff. I didn't know what the layout was even. And so I I went in and added that and changed it, and it made it so much better because it is absolutely a fabulous house. And so and that also brought up a character who in the story, in the kind of my celebration of entrepreneurship, she mentions that she and her husband created a bed and breakfast in this old house, and that they had renovated it, and now she's elderly, and I just came up with this character completely from nothing. I mean, she didn't
She's not
exist in
based
real
on
life.
anyone in your life.
Only barely, like just sort of in some ways she is. I think that Southerners will recognize her in a way. She's actually based, if there's anybody she's based on, it would be a great aunt who told who was sort of radical and didn't care what people thought. and this character doesn't either, and she's 90 now, and so she really doesn't care what anybody thinks. And she but it gave me the idea for all of that part of that comes from you telling me I needed to expand the story, and so I had to add some things there. And in the original draft, before you read it, Uly gets off the bus, and then he immediately starts to try to figure out how to get back to Georgia. And in the book as it is now, he walks across the road, and it was like a gray fog. I didn't know what he did next, and I didn't have an idea for it. And I said, okay, well, what would he see if he was standing in Charleston in this area? And I thought, well, maybe he'd see some old houses from the early 1900s or the late 1800s. Oh, I could use that house that I know about, the Queen Anne Victorian that's here in Hawkinsville. I could put it in Charleston, and he sees that. Okay, so what? Oh, there's an elderly lady walking over there. And I grew up with all these great aunts, right? And and so I think that they're probably a conglomeration of feisty great aunts, right? And so she's walking slowly. She's a little old lady, and she goes up the steps, and Uly's like, oh, well, I can help her. I need to help this little old lady walking up the steps, and he goes over there. So I don't want to spoil anything else, but I'll tease it. But she's an entrepreneur, and so I'm celebrating that. And then later, there's a character who has a truck, and he delivers food service equipment and supplies, and that's actually based on a real friend who has a similar business. He stays more local. Like in the story, he travels kind of all over Georgia. But my friend, who actually does have a supply business like that, kind of stays in a little bit smaller area, but it's based on him. And that
Does he
idea
know he's
is,
in the book?
well, actually, I haven't told him.
Shh.
He's going to be surprised. I'm going to send him like one of the hardcover books and say thanks for the inspiration. Restaurants, I've worked in restaurants, and so there's several restaurants in the book. And there's Waffle House. I love Waffle House. I like to talk to people. If I'm alone, I'll talk to a waiter or waitress, especially in a place like that, kind of a diner. And it's fascinating. You learn a lot, and you learn where people are coming from and why they're there. And some people do it out of love, and some people do it out of like necessity. And so in my story, one of the characters, he's actually based on somebody who does not work at a Waffle House, but that is kind of a real character. The one at the Waffle House, he who talks fast and just kind of like I'm talking now, but this is an interview. I don't do this in real life all the time. This is, uh, but this character does, and I've known people who do that, and so so Waffle House is in there. I think Waffle House is a cool company. There's a truck stop in there that has a restaurant, and in every case, these entrepreneurs are not the bad guys, who are making life more miserable for you. That's not the case. And then there's some entrepreneurship that's more like ministry based, people creating charities, and there's a pastor, and there's a choir, a traveling choir in the story, and that was based on a real experience I had when I was in college. I was in a traveling audition Christian choir, and we would go to churches exactly like in the book, but we were college students instead of members of a traveling choir from a church. So that's a different kind of entrepreneurship. It's not business, it's not for profit. It's not something you can buy, but at the same time, it's a type of creative creation of a service or of something that people do. And so that's how I approached that. And I wanted to celebrate that. And I like that I do that in the book.
Mm-hmm. That's really neat that it could be used as a textbook.
Yeah.
It's a fun kind of textbook.
And I actually did do that on purpose. Like how can I celebrate these things? Almost you could learn it without studying it. Yeah. By reading this story, you learn something.
That is a big part of what we're doing here, endowing treasure through story. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea that the brain lights up in the same way, whether you're reading about it or doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And can
Right.
prepare you for what you're going into if you read it about somebody else doing it beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought it was interesting to use some characters who were not helping Uly. So there's kind of a sequence of somebody helps him and then somebody doesn't, and somebody helps him and somebody doesn't. And he meets up with these people who are helpful and then people who aren't. And I think that gives it some uh authenticity, or like it feels real. Because some people are very helpful and some people aren't, right? And so and Uly meets those people, and they have their reasons, and but he's often like helping them back, and some of them he helps are also helpful, and some of them he helps are not, and so there's this play back and forth, and it's also some contrasts. The mean guy really isn't mean, or the guy that seems the least with it mentally actually might be the most with it mentally, in the story. And
I was going to ask about him. You don't want to talk about him?
I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a lot going on in some of those things. And then I'm trying to remember if there's anything else like that. There is a young guy working at a hotel who's not at all helpful, but he's not an entrepreneur. He's just a worker there. And so I think that was the difference, is that sometimes the people, I didn't want, I wanted to, I wanted to make it where that the people who are helpful to Uly also have a background that is praiseworthy in a way. And that praiseworthiness comes from being an entrepreneur, or being hardworking, or persevering or um, wanting to provide services that are wonderful in some way, like the choir director who wants her choir to be beautiful and to be helpful to people. So that's that's what I was doing in some ways, and that was intentional. There were intentional things that I was doing there. It wasn't happenstance. It wasn't like, oh, what am I going to do next? Some of that was thinking, I really want to use this. I want this to be something in my book. How do I incorporate it?
That's fascinating. I think that you have written a book that goes beyond Southern culture, and it has some universal themes in it for all the world. If we can connect human to human, and I think you've done
Yeah.
that beautifully.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And I do encourage everybody to go out and buy Uly and read it and immerse yourselves in the colors of Georgia, the characters, and the businesses.
And I want Uly to be, like you said, it's more than just Southern fiction. It's more than just relevant to some people who know their way around Georgia. It has some human connection that's more universal. And I appreciate you saying that because I was thinking it, but I think there's a certain amount of wanting to be humble, but actually knowing for sure that this is relevant to beyond that.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with pride or humility. It's the task and the heart that beats inside you, and you want to give that heart to other people, and I think you have achieved that greatly.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for interviewing
I
me.
was just going to say we wish you all the best with Uly, and I hope that Uly finds the people who need to hear that. Ah, there we go. Pre-sale starts April 5th. This is 2022. Publication date May 3rd, 2022. Brilliant. Have a wonderful rest of your day.